How long is it going to be before I can just ask a chatbot, look at all this data and identify me some ideas for how do I get more subscribers or lower my churn or something
Yeah.
like that? And it's looking at everything from article length to article topics and is spitting out some recommendations
Yeah.
based on each database.
I can answer that. It's exactly where we're headed with this, Simon, is that because we sit on so much data at Omeda, both web, the individual user, the credit card information, their email behavior, their event attendance, their webinar attendance, the insights that we can use. And we are building out an MCP layer to use Claude and our own sort of AI agent within the Omeda platform to do exactly that. Help me understand this. Help me figure this out. Help me build an analysis across these things. We'll be rolling the first version of this out in June. And then very quickly after that, into the summer, we'll be having a much more robust product on that as well. So it's here. This stuff is here. And I think it's only going to make media companies more efficient and more able to act faster on signals. Again, I still believe the content should be written by a human, but it doesn't mean you can't use these things to provide better analysis.
Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. James Capo has spent much of the last decade helping publishers solve one of the industry's biggest challenges: how to better understand and monetize their audiences. As CEO of Omeda, he oversees a platform that powers subscription management, email marketing, audience data, and paywall tools for many of the world's largest media companies. In a recent interview, Capo explained why he believes many publishers have made audience management far more complicated than it needs to be, how AI could soon help publishers better predict churn and improve subscriptions, and why media companies should build more niche products and verticals around loyal audiences. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, gently tap on that subscribe button so you can see more interviews with the world's most successful media entrepreneurs. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Simon. Happy to be here.
So, super excited to talk to you. You run a company that's well known within more enterprise publishing circles called Amida, and I really want to kind of dive into what Amida does and how you help publishers and everything like that, specifically as it relates to how they can utilize their data more effectively. I'd love to just get the kind of 30,000 view history of Amida, because I know it started out as something completely, I mean, not completely different, but very different than what it is today. So it actually, even though a lot of people know it today as a digital data type of company, it actually has very analog roots. It started all the way back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, we actually started in the in the early 80s. And we started as a print fulfillment organization. And what was great about that was media companies at the time had, what was not called first party data back then. But if anyone who is old enough remembers, in magazines, they still have this today, the little blowout cards that would fall out of the magazine, and folks would write down their information and mail in a check to subscribe to the publication. And so Omeda started as that sort of databasing of that first party data, or of that subscriber file, as it was called many years ago back then. And so that's how we started. And so our roots, as the DNA of our company, is really in managing audience data. That has been sort of the foundation and sort of the heartbeat of our business. And as you mentioned, we've grown and added more digital tools on top of that fundamental understanding of that audience data. But yeah, that's how we started out. And to this day, we still have a good number of clients who still have subscriptions that we help process that come through the mail.
Yeah, it drives me insane that so I'm a longtime subscriber to the New Yorker, and they still put those inserts in there, and it falls out. And I'm like, God, now I have to go to the trash can and throw this away. It's like I'm already a subscriber. I've never subscribed using one of these cards, and yet you insist on giving me trash to throw away with every issue.
It's pretty crazy how many checks we still receive. So I mean, it is still a viable revenue stream for many publishers, and for whatever reason, as I'm sure many of us have family members who still like writing a check, there are still a large portion of the population that still wants to subscribe to something by writing a check. So there you go.
Yeah. And so back then, or maybe even still now, so when someone would mail that in, would it not even go to the magazine? It would go directly to Omeda's office?
Yeah, it'd go directly to we have a fulfillment center that would go directly there. We process process the check, we process the order, and we deposit that money directly into our clients' accounts. And so we have a full audit trails and financial trails and financial reporting around this. It's something we've been doing for 40 years, frankly. So we're really good at it. Obviously, the volume has decreased, as you can imagine. But direct mail as a channel, not that we need to be talking about the mail channel, but direct mail as sort of a marketing channel is still pretty powerful. Now, people aren't writing checks anymore. They're getting a direct mail piece and they're going online and placing the order, obviously. And publishers are transitioning as best they can their audience to go online, obviously, because to capture the credit card, to get the auto renewal, things along those lines. But as a marketing channel, direct mail is pretty powerful still.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the digital transformation, which I think has largely happened during your
Yes.
tenure. So what were you doing prior to joining Amita? Like, I saw
Yeah.
that you were like the Associated Press, and
Yeah. I started my
so you
career.
had.
Yeah, I started my career in. I've been in media basically my entire career, either now on the publishing and media side, or now on the vendor side. But I started my career at the Associated Press. I was there for about 8 9 years, primarily in the broadcast department over there, or division. So there, I worked on a software technology that helped broadcasters produce, edit, deploy their news within sort of local TV stations. I worked at the Daily Show and things like that, where we would help sort of transition their back end technology using the AP software to do that. So I did that for about 8 or 9 years. It was a great experience doing that. And then business school, and then after that, I ended up in the publishing route, where I was the publisher at a company at the time was called Cygnus Business Media, and I ran fire, law, and EMT. So I had actually a lot of knowledge around the public safety sector. So we had a brand called Officer.com and Firehouse and EMS World, where we had events and magazines and websites and white papers and webinars and newsletters and the whole sort of gamut that you would see today for media companies. And then I left there and joined Access Intelligence, which has about a very traditional B2B media company, about 40 different brands, primarily in the aerospace, power, healthcare. But the brands your clients might know, Ad Exchange, or excuse me, your listeners might know is Ad Exchanger and Ad Monsters. Those are two brands that Access Intelligence owns as well. So I worked digital across that entire portfolio, where really I got my hands around sort of the concept of first party data, but also how it could help publishers really do things faster, better, and more efficiently.
Yeah, and so you were never like were on the journalism side of media. Like, were you always? Was it just accidental that you ended up where you are? Were you like fascinated with like reading, biographies of like Henry Luce and William Randolph Hearst growing up
Yeah,
or
I mean,
something?
so I grew up in Atlanta, and maybe this is too soon, but Ted Turner was a big, fan of mine growing up in Atlanta. Obviously, I interned at CNN in college and in high school, so I've always had like a desire to be around the media industry. I was never on the journalism side. I was always more on the production, technology, business side of these companies. But no, Ted Turner, I think William Randolph Hearst, obviously, these folks are just massive figures in the sort of the pantheon of media, and you can go down the list of them. So I've always felt media has had sort of this interesting, obviously, role in society, and it's not a monolith. I think that's the other thing. You and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. I think sometimes media is seen as this monolith, and it's really not. There's a lot of pockets of media that are doing extremely well, even though there's sort of this outside take that media is struggling. Not saying it doesn't have its issues, for sure, but it isn't a monolith, and not the media industry doesn't necessarily react or have the same pressures on it and sort of slices of it that you see.
Yeah, and so you went to go work at Amita in 2014.
16. Yep. Yep.
2016. So what was kind of the state? So you talked about its early days. It's like
Yep.
a print fulfillment, circulation fulfillment type of thing. What was it? What was the state of it in 2016?
Yeah, the state of 16, it was interesting. So at my time of Access Intelligence, I like to call the EIEIO of technology, right? I had every piece of tech you could possibly imagine. And these are not, yeah, these are good platforms for what they do as a point solution. But I had an email service provider and a marketing automation company. I had a subscription paywall solution. I had a CDP at the time that wasn't called a CDP. I had built my own paywall. I had all this sort of pieces of tech that I was trying to navigate. And what really sort of struck me was that my best data was actually in my subscription business, which was actually at the time I was a client of Omida's. And what it also struck me is that I was paying for Simon Owens 5 times. So paying for you and a record in my email provider, and paying for you and my paywall provider, and paying for you and my CDP and this and that. So this one audience record I was paying for across all these different solutions. And you as an audience member don't interact with us that way. You don't see yourself as like, oh, I'm the newsletter person, or I'm the website person, or I'm the paywall person. You interact with, we'll talk about the New Yorker. You interact with the New Yorker the way you want to interact with it, right? And media companies were doing a really good job of explaining their problems to their audience, right? And sort of explaining how this doesn't work for them. And so the state of Omida at the time was very much a sort of still a subscription fulfillment business, but had built back in the early 2000s a very robust email platform. So we had an email solution for literally for the last 25, 30 years. We've been in the email game, and the beginnings of what the industry has called a CDP, which really fundamentally what I believe a CDP is sort of obviously organizing all the data, which Omida was, but more importantly, dragging in that sort of what I call web data. So that anonymous cookie, converting that unknown record to a known individual. That was sort of the beginnings of Omida. And the way I like to describe it, it was kind of the great house in in Brooklyn, great location, but just needed a little bit of a renovation from the ground up to get it to where it needed to be. When I joined, we launched a marketing automation platform. We expanded our paywall. We expanded now, obviously, our AI solutions. We got more into consumer media, and we really sort of simplified that tech stack for the media and publishing industry.
What does CDP stand for?
Customer data platform. So these are solutions where there's some out there you're familiar with, might be like a treasure data or an M particle or things like that. And what they're sort of thinking is like, okay, dump all this data into a data warehouse, add connectors to it. But really, where Omid is different is we actually have the concept of products. And so in our world, the New Yorker is the brand, but the magazine, the website, the newsletters are products within our data set. And so there's a little bit more fundamental structure to our platform, where we can actually help publishers see across the product, but also create that single record. So in our system, your record is one record, Simon Owens, with multiple email addresses, multiple mailing addresses, multiple credit card profiles, multiple products, all within a managed governed database from there.
Yeah, and so you never really launched like a CMS. Like the only publishing product that you run is like the email newsletter type like basically,
Yeah,
right?
pay
Like that's the only.
subscription management, paywall solutions, obviously print solutions, and then email marketing, newsletter, et cetera. Yeah. So the way I've thought about it, Simon, is like the media companies have two things: content and audience. That's really what I believe. And for whatever as you as an editorial side, if you had to log into 17 different CMSs, your head would have exploded years ago, right? We solved that for the editorial, which is the product, right? Editorial is the content is the product. We never solved that for audience, yet our audience members live in all these other solutions. So my fundamental question was like, if you believe content and audience are the core assets of a media company, why do we not treat audience with the same way we treat content? And so that's kind of how I've pushed Omida and sort of been my vision for Omida since I started here.
So how does Amita sit on top of the publishing operation? Like they're using, especially digital, like they're using WordPress, or maybe they have their own proprietary CMS that they've made. Like how does Amita like integrate into that?
Yeah, so the WordPress piece, the CMS side. So first of all, we provide a JavaScript code which allows to then bring all that rich metadata. So what what articles are people reading, what are they clicking on, et cetera. And we tie that all to the user record. So it can be any CMS you're using, can be supported in this environment. So you have your content engine and you have your audience engine, and the content engine is feeding that metadata and sort of that URL structure to the audience records within the Omeda platform. So that's one way we integrate with the CMSs. The other way we integrate is from an editorial perspective. Many of our clients will deploy their newsletters from their CMS. So we can be a completely headless environment, whereas other solutions make you log in and deploy newsletters from their solution. In an enterprise environment like a WordPress or Drupal, you have 80, 90 different brands, you're not able to do that in some of these sort of, I would call sort of single brand solutions. You really need that enterprise CMS. And so from that perspective, the editorial team can log into the CMS, create their newsletter, deploy the newsletter, test the newsletter, whole 9 yards, because of the headless environment we have with our email sending engine from there. So that's another way we integrate pretty well.
And is the client having to hire you to like do a custom integration, I guess, to like plug in all your different stuff to their, because you have so many varieties of CMSs and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the client, but because we're generally selling to sort of, I would say, more mature organizations. They generally have a tech team on staff that knows how to do this pretty quickly. But this isn't something that is, I would say, a major lift. Most of our clients can knock this out in a few days, if they understand they have someone who's sort of their traditional handling the website CMS environment from there. But we also have plugins with WordPress and a few others, so there's just plugins folks can use right away from that perspective. And then obviously they can log into our system as well and send the email. So there's nothing that keeps them from logging in directly into Omeda. It's a nice interface, do all that. But when you have 90 brands and each brand is sending out maybe 5 or 6 newsletters a week, the workflow piece of this gets very interesting. And so that's where we really shine in that workflow component, because it's such a nice workflow solution throughout the tech stack of the media company.
So a lot of the guests that I have on my show are kind of either solo creators or small media operations that probably wouldn't be an Amida client. Like
Sure.
they're using some kind of very kind of like simple paywall solution, whether it's like Substack or Beehive or Ghost or Patreon,
Right.
or maybe if they're going slightly higher, they're using like Memberful or maybe Piano or something like that. And like the paywall, like my paywall is very straightforward. I put it on my article case studies, and then I pick a point somewhere in that article, put the paywall there, and then I send it out, and it'll send out a free version of the newsletter with the paywall cut off,
Yep.
and then to the paid subscriber. Like it's not like super sophisticated. I'm determining like how the paywall works and stuff like that. And Substack will also allow you to like do some other stuff, like after like something's completely free, but after 7 days it automatically gets placed behind a paywall. But it's still pretty rudimentary. But like once you're getting up to these kind of more enterprise levels and using, Amida, and you have like the data coming in from the email service, you have marketing automation, stuff like that. What are like the more sophisticated things you can start doing with first party data to make a better paywall that's like, converting people at a higher rate than someone
Yeah.
would get from like, a more rudimentary system like what I'm using?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some tactical things, right, Simon, by having all the content sort of connected here, excuse me, the audience data connected with the content. We can see very quickly that an anonymous user is browsing this content, right? This anonymous user, now we know they signed up for the newsletter, but they're not a paid subscriber. So we have various different tiers in our platform as well that we can then use our technology so that your readers who aren't paywalls are getting automated messaging right when they maybe have certain topics that you have a connected paywall to. By connecting the email and the web data plus the subscriber information, you're really able to create sort of this always on marketing engine when someone to the individual is coming to your site or engaging with your email, or they've logged in or not. So the other thing about our solution is I really like referring to it more as a kind of a meter, because the business decides whether it's a reg wall, a data wall, or a paywall. We can do any of that, right? Up and down that solution. And then when you get a little bit more into enterprise, I want gift subscriptions. I want group subscriptions. I want multiple products as part of my subscription, which particularly if you're, kind of a one-man band, you're not as worried about the financial implications of that. But our enterprise clients need to split that revenue, right? So product A, product B, product C, a bundle. You can do bundles with us. So there's just a ton of more flexibility as you get kind of a little bit more stepped up into what you offer as a business. And that's why foundationally we do work with small companies who start with us, at a very sort of entry level, not because they don't have access to the tech, but more just because of the size of their business. They just don't have the scale yet. So we do work with sort of, I would call clients that are just starting out because they see us as a foundational piece, just like you would with a CMS. You're not going to have a CMS necessarily for your newsletter and a CMS for your website and a CMS for something else. You're going to start with that foundation. So while we do work more in the enterprise, majority of our clients, we've had clients that have grown with us and sort of started at that foundational level. And from a price point standpoint, it's just entry level based on records and how you're managing. So there's nothing that our big boys have that our little guys don't have access to from that.
Well, like, what's a concrete example of you peeling off a specific reader and delivering them some kind of experience that would be different from what I can offer on Substack in terms of like pulling them down the content funnel
Yeah,
or
I
the
think
marketing funnel?
you have to think of it a little bit more in terms of like the multi-product approach, right? Because yeah, just if I have a content funnel and I'm just due to a paid subscriber on my website, Substack can do that. You can sort of you can do that funnel down and things from that. But where it gets interesting with our platform is that you might have another brand or another product or another event or a webinar that we're storing that here. So now the user is coming in thinking, hey, I'm going to get subscribed to an article. I'm going to or buy a subscription. But now because of the metadata and because of the user profile we have, we now see we're going to offer you a ticket to our event we're hosting in DC in 6 weeks, right? We're going to start offering you other products across our portfolio that we might have that you may not be a subscriber to, you might want to register for. So you start to create a deeper profile of that individual where it's not just a slice of the subscription on the website, but there's multiple products around that individual. And I truly believe media is going to grow by getting a little bit more niche and getting more share of wallet from their audience member, right? The top of the funnel, just growing traffic for the sake of growing traffic. I just don't think we're ever going to win that game. So how do you win the game? You become more connected, and we like to talk about this, sort of building that connected economy. You become more connected to that reader through multiple products and for multiple ways of displaying those products to those clients, to those subscribers.
What about different things like content, like personalized content recommendation or anything like
Yep.
that? Is that capability right really there? Like, I don't really see that much from publishers. Like,
No, I mean, I think
if I go to the
yeah.
New York Times, I see the same homepage that everybody else is going, visiting the New York Times. Like,
Yeah.
what level of customization is even possible?
I think so. We offer a content recommendation component both in our email as well as online. So if you go to the website, any of our clients' websites, if they have this turned on, because you've read these stories, you will like these stories, right? And they might be gated, they might be paid, and we can do that both in email and web. So you get the same experience across web and email there. I think the one-to-one personalization is a little bit easier in the email channel for reasons because you're just kind of a little bit that focus there on that channel. I think web gets a little bit nuanced because you might have incognito browsers or different bots or things like this coming to the website. I agree. I haven't seen something that's like completely built out. We do have clients when they require registration, able to offer up certain topics in areas of interest that reader might be interested because they've told them that. I do think this is an area where AI probably is going to help publishers is sort of be a little bit more personalized with that experience online, whether that's through maybe you like a different color set, maybe you like a different graphics, maybe you respond. I can see AI as a front end dev engine being a little helping in that environment. But just because of the numbers now, it's really hard to do that at a publisher level. The content, I think, is the other piece where it's how much of that is going to be personalized by AI or how much is going to be just more recommended by AI. I think most journalists would say they want something recommended by AI. They don't want something personalized by AI.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but like, it's just like YouTube, Facebook, they've all just become these huge businesses. But then they also just have more content to work with than a publisher. But like read the Wall Street Journal like newsletter every morning. It's called the 10 Point, the
Hmm.
Bloomberg Morning Edition, and the New York Times. And of those three, I think, and I don't even know 100% know if this is true, but I think the New York Times For You newsletter is somewhat personalized based on my interest.
Topics. Yeah.
I think I'm not even 100% sure, and I'm almost positive that the Wall Street Journal and the Bloomberg are just it's the same newsletter they're sending to everybody. So it really seems like there is not a lot of personalized like content recommendation
Well, and
that's
I
going
think
on
it's
in the
done, it's
publishing
done in a
space.
cohort environment. I think to your point that the amount of content you need, yeah, I think the amount of content you need to really personalize is publishers just don't have. But I think at the cohort level, they can get a little bit more personalized on that, particularly if you're declarative in what you're telling them, but also them using sort of their insights and their behaviors to see that also.
So, like the sidebar article or at the bottom of the article, those recommendations, you think that they're based on people who have read this article tend to like these other articles, or
Yeah,
what
generally
level
it's
of
kind of like
granularity?
it's a little bit like the Netflix model. It's like, it's either a probabilistic or declarative where it's like, okay, someone like me who has a similar browsing type history also read these articles. So it's going to recommend those based on your own behaviors. It's going to recommend things. So you might have told it in your profile that you live in DC, so it's going to recommend DC stories to you from there. It might know you might have said what sports teams you're interested in, so you're going to get maybe not just like a Nats story, but you're also going to get stories from the National League East, right? From that as well. So there's different ways that they're doing it. I obviously don't know New York Times algorithm, but it's very much sort of that cohort. Generally speaking, what media does is what we do is more cohort analysis and then presenting content based on the cohort that you might be part of.
And is Amita like is it part of that recommendation? Is it just are they hooking up some kind of content recommendation widget and it's feeding Amita's feeding into it, or
Yeah,
where is Amita like integrate into all
for
that kind of
us,
stuff?
it's our widget. So because we have access to the URLs and to the metadata from the websites, and if the clients that are using us, it will then recommend other stories or other articles that we see as a grouping of that. So client and what we've been offering now too is that readers can now start to train it and say, nope, this isn't of interest to me. Yes, it is, and that will come back into our system and start to learn more around that as well.
So that's a specific widget you offer is like
Yes.
the if you like this, then you'll like this type
Yeah,
of thing
both
on
in
article.
email and web, because I think people forget that like you kind of want to start having that experience, somewhat similar experience as you, so you're not feeling completely out of touch with the reader. But because we own that email channel and we own the web channel in terms of that experience, we can sort of customize that across both.
What about the rise of dynamic paywalls? Like, are they overhyped, or how many publishers are embracing them? This whole idea of like, I'm going to serve a paywall to this user at the exact moment that we're going to predict that they want to subscribe, not just based on some kind of preset
Right.
metered like five free articles or anything like that.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. One, AI is going to help this a ton and be more specific in terms of when that paywall should be deployed based on user behaviors and what we see. And we do some of that today. We can sort of see some trends in the data when someone is actually going to, register or pay for something. I think we have to be a little careful, just like, it's not like the airline industry has a great reputation for dynamic pricing based on your, how many seats are left on the plane. So there isn't like we're not limiting seats, right? There's not a demand, there's not a supply constraint here from the media side. I can get as many people to pay for my content as much as I would. So I think there is a little bit sense of media going a little too far, and when we try to do these dynamic paywalls to jump up a price or get these initial offers in. I get that, but I think we have to be careful of how much we're pushing that onto the audience member. I do think that if we create really good content and you can stand behind that content and you have an audience that is willing to pay for it, they will pay for it. They will pay for that content. Now, at what price point does it, do you have an elasticity issue and you push it, is it inelastic or elastic, and how far can you go? I think it very much depends on the market and the type of content. Wall Street Journal, they can probably raise their prices a little bit more on me, right? Chicago Tribune probably can't, right? Just because of the types of content that I'm receiving from those two types of entities from there. It is becoming more of a I think more powerful with AI with this. But I also think we need to remember paywall is one part of it. You also have a reg wall and a data wall, and you have different ways to get that user's or information that you might be happy with in terms of just getting some information, which you're able to add better advertising, better targeting, and then you have paywall solutions depending on how you want to treat that audience. So there's not a one size fits all here. Again, going back to my comment, media is not a monolith. We have to be careful not to paint everything with a broad brush.
Yeah. I only recently learned. So, like, obviously, I always knew that dynamic paywalls have been existing for years. I didn't realize that dynamic pricing was in effect, where they're actually quoting a higher price to someone that they think can actually pay a higher price. Like, if
Yeah,
you're in some affluent Boston suburb, you get shown a higher price than like a less affluent Boston suburb, if, for the Boston Globe and stuff like that.
yeah. I don't know how widespread this is yet, but it is something I do know media companies are experimenting with for sure. And then you get into an auto renewal issue, step up pricing, free terms, gift, term, all these, ways you can start to play with that data, and that's something we're very good at actually, is because of our history in subscription management. Just because you get the subscription the one time, well, now you need to retain it, right? You don't want churn. How are you going to treat the pricing? How are you going to act with them? So there's a whole other downstream effect here that we sometimes forget, and that I think media companies and I think sometimes smaller organizations forget, like, oh, we're just going to put a paywall up. Well, then you have to notify them. There's every state has a different notification now in terms of when auto renewals. There's just a lot of things that go into this that we sometimes forget. It's not as simple as just give me your credit card on that.
And obviously they're not like advertising that they're doing this.
Right.
How much do you think there's like a potential user backlash? Because like there are certain markets where consumers are expected to expect dynamic prices, like hotels, planes, stuff like that. But if the price of like road salt or sidewalk salt or whatever spiked during a blizzard or something like that, like there would be, a massive
Massive.
consumer
Right. Yeah.
backlash. Like I wonder like what the consumer sentiment towards like news organizations charging them differently based
Yeah,
on.
I agree. I don't know if it's the smartest way to go, to be honest. I think there you have to be careful. As I said, there's no supply constraint here, right? It's not like an airline or hotel that, it's the Super Bowl weekend, and so there's only so many hotels left in the market. Um, I also think you're going to see some legislation, particularly if it's AI. I think you're starting to see some of this, that what AI, particularly led by the states, less so the federal government, but what can you use AI for in a consumer environment, right? Is dynamic pricing with AI because you live in an affluent Boston zip code? Can you do that, right? Is that something that they're going to allow us to do? And I think you'll see certain states that get a little ahead of that, and some won't. But ultimately, it's going to come down to, again, I think the consumer and the market dictating this on some level from there.
Yeah. So obviously maybe this isn't so obvious. Maybe this is a question I should ask, but like it seems like a lot of the low hanging fruit in subscriptions is like gone, and now a lot of publishers are focused more on subscriber churn right now. Like, what are ways that like you could use data to try to lower your churn and identify subscribers that are maybe falling off and stuff like that to try to re-engage them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple ones obviously is, have they opened, have they clicked, have they visited? Those are obviously your sort of your entry level metrics of sort of a churn predictor. It's something we are actually working on and building on right now because of all the data we sit on. We see both in terms of visits to the websites, opens, clicks, things, and all those are directional, right? You have to be a little bit using particularly opens in the email world. Very much, anyone tells you whatever their open rate is, I would say take 30% off of that metric. It's just not real anymore. I'm not saying not saying that it's a bad metric. I'm just saying you can't use it as the like how well and how good North Star of your business from there. So you really got to get down to clicks, and then clicks become another component of that because there are tons of bots. We we are very publicly open on the amount of bot clicks that we negate from our reporting. We've been doing it since 2011. We wrote a white paper on it with one of the industry standards organizations that combines ESPs and ISPs. So even bot clicks are a potential, metric that you have to look at. Really, what you have to do is see multi-channel. You have to look, and this is where I think Omida plays really well, because you're able to offer a web experience, know that it's Simon. Also understand that the product that you're subscribing to is a newsletter or a marketing email, and you've been to the website. And when you have that data in disparate places, having that sort of insight that churn is potentially coming is makes it harder to do. And so if I can see that you've registered or you're logging into the website, but you may not clicking on the articles you have, or maybe you're not interested in newsletter A anymore, but you've been more interested in newsletter B or webinar promo C, you start to see, okay, you're still there. There's still a heartbeat here. There's still a person there. But so much of the noise, we miss the signal from the noise because of the way that media has set up their audience stack. And not to bring it back to that, but like it's so clear to me that like you have audience on all these platforms. Oh, how do we mitigate churn? Well, why the hell do we have all these audience? Why are you using all these platforms to manage your audience in the first place? It just doesn't makes sense to me. And so I think some of the ways that, looking at click-through rates, looking at repeat visitors to the website, looking at depth of both the clicks on the website, but also click on the newsletter. Did they do anything else with you? Have they downloaded a white paper? Have they downloaded a course? Are there other things that you can look at to start putting in a churn predictor or an idea that this folks might be, a leading indicator for churn from there? Do they have maybe they switched email addresses on you? Maybe it's not jcapo at Gmail, but it's James Capo at Omida now, and you just don't see that in the data from that because you have two different people in your data set.
So is churn reduction more about identifying a specific user who's likely to churn and giving them something different? Or is it more about identifying why people are churning in mass and changing things about your strategy to make your site more sticky or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's going to have churn, right? No one's going to have zero churn. So I think at the individual level, it's a signal, and then at the greater level, is this a big problem we're having, right? And is there a way to group certain cohorts on why they are churning more than others? Now if you're a newsletter for the media industry and and then you start writing about restaurants, well, how's your product changed, right? Is there something there that you've done in your product now you're seeing churn increase there? So I think it's more the mass churn you need to be careful of, because that signals a shift that you're not landing with your core audience anymore. Now, there are obviously, particularly in niche verticals, there are folks you want on your list that are, industry influencers or things like that. If you start to see them fall off, then you start to wonder, what are you not hitting on directly? So again, not painting media with a broad brush, but if you're the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, you know, Jamie Dimon subscribing from your newsletter is probably not a great thing, but it's not going to ruin your business. But if you are like the very, very focused niche, financial newsletter, and Jamie Dimon's unsubscribes, then you might have a different issue from there. So there's a community aspect that we have to think about when churn really increases, and you have to layer that into what your content strategy is and what your in market you're trying to do there. So it's not a simple answer, but I think I would take more of the sort of that middle approach was, see who are my key, folks, who are the types of people, CEOs, CFOs, product folks that I'm trying to reach. And then am I seeing a mass or am I seeing individuals fall off? You're always going to have churn. There's no way to get around that. But is your strategy, your content strategy actually hitting the right folks you're trying to go after?
Yeah, so is it like looking at your dashboard and like filtering it for what are the content categories where paid subscribers are reading it more often? Because obviously the more often they read, the lower their churn, and it's like producing more whatever that thing is, and not letting like overall traffic patterns guide you, but more like I don't know, like what.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm kind of skeptical that like I'm seeing someone not opening the newsletters anymore, and that there's some kind of email I can send them that's like going to bring them back into the fold. I don't know, like.
yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you on that. I mean, I'm still just, we all get so much email, right? Am I going to see that one email from you? Hey, come back. I think that does go into more understanding, particularly in that, like what was the last thing they read? What is like what's the long tail of their content? Can you group their content habits into buckets, right? Okay, they obviously, every time I wrote an article about a financial issue in media, this spiked, right? Okay, this cohort spiked. So I do think that's where we talked about personalization a little bit. Maybe you have four stories, and the fourth story is a financial M&A thing going on in the media industry. Well, to this cohort, maybe that goes to the top, right? Maybe that's the first, maybe that's the headline, the subject line that's more personalized for that cohort versus another cohort, right? From there. So I think there's things there you can do with AI, and from that perspective. Listen, I don't think there's the one special email you can send to someone who's about to churn, to be like, okay, come back, and please come back. From there, I do think looking at what paying subscribers are reading, I think looking at what the top of the funnel is driving, I think you do have to be a little careful there, because sometimes acts of God or viral stories you just skew the data a bit from that. I think looking at particularly what is your core audience? Are you talking to CFOs? Are you talking to CEOs? Are you talking to operators? Are you talking to runners? Like really understanding what that core audience is, and then making sure that that core audience is engaging with the content you want to be around. Um, I hate to say it's simple, but it's not. We sometimes make it harder than it needs to be.
How long is it going to be before I can just ask a chatbot, look at all this data and identify me some ideas for how do I like get my core or get more subscribers or lower my churn or something
Yeah.
like that. And it's looking at everything from article link to article topics to what have you, and is spitting out some recommendations
Yeah.
based on that
So
huge like database.
I can answer that because June in Omida are the first phase of that, and then August for our next phase of that. So we is exactly where we're headed with this, Simon, is that because we sit on so much data at Omida, both web, the individual user, the credit card information, their email behavior, their event attendance for those clients that provide that to us, their webinar attendance, the insights that we can use, and we're building out an MCP layer to use Claude and some of these other what I call entities, as well as our own sort of AI agent within the Omeda platform to do exactly that. Help me understand this. Help me figure this out. Help me build an analysis across these things. So we demoed this at our client conference 2 weeks ago here in Chicago, and we'll be rolling the first version of this out in June, and then very quickly after that into the summer we'll be having a much more robust product on that as well. So it's here. This stuff is here, and I think it's only going to make media companies more efficient and more able to act faster on signals. Again, I still believe the content should be written by a human, but it doesn't mean you can't use these things to provide better analysis.
Yeah, I just read that like Bloomberg Terminal has rolled out a chatbot that like kind of can pull like basically just you do prompts and then it's like looking into the data and like and creating reports and
Yeah,
stuff like that
it's
for you.
wild. I mean, we sit at the ground truth data, like at Omeda, because of where we, both at the individual's data set, their address, their credit card, their phone number, their email behaviors, open clicks, their website behaviors, open clicks, whether they're registered, paid, etc. All that data Omeda sits at the ground truth, and because of our product structure, we have really. This is where AI can go real deep and really help sort of expose some of this data to our clients.
So what about the thesis of my starting question was that this we've all the low hanging fruit is gone. Like the biggest publisher now is the New York Times. It only has 13 million subscribers. You look at like things like Netflix and
Yeah.
Spotify and stuff like that, and we're talking to hundreds of millions of subscribers. So like, what's the and you see like polls of news consumers, and it keeps on topping out at like 20, somewhere between 20 and 25% are paying for even a single news subscription. Is have we like kind of topped out in terms of the population that's paying for that, or have we just not got as the publishing industry not gotten good enough at converting people or communicating value or
I
something like
think,
that?
yeah, I think, again, media as a monolith. You have the news organizations. You have sort of, I would call that sort of prosumer type environment, which would be someone who's into woodworking or into running. You have the deep B2B stuff as well. And then you have kind of city and regional. So I live in Chicago. Crane Business Report's a big, covers the city of Chicago from a business perspective. So I think we sometimes have to, like, again, separate the strategies from each one of these. And the big publishers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journals, and I would call the day-to-day news organizations. And really, when you look at New York Times, it's their games and there's other things that are funding the news operation from there. Do I think people want trusted sources of news? I do. And having been at the AP, I will sit here and say all day long that, like, there's an important benefit to society to having those types of brands and those people who do really good work and put their lives in danger, frankly, in many cases. I remember there's a wall at the AP with the names of every AP journalist who's died in a war zone. Like, this is real stuff that needs to be reported. Is it tapped out up there? I would think there is probably a limit to what general people will pay for general news. I think that is definitely a limit. And I think that's exactly why you see the New York Times trying to layer in these other things and bundles and things like that to drive that subscription that then covers the news operation. And frankly, it's I hate to say this is like television. NBC News didn't make a lot of money. You know what made a lot of money? The Today Show. The Today Show made a crap load of money that funded the rest of the news organizations. And so I think we're looking at this slightly like how TV did for many years, is that, like, their entertainment and their sort of other areas of these networks funded the news operations in many cases because of that. So is there a cap? Yes. I think taking it now a step further, is there valuable other products and subscriptions that media companies can offer their audience members? Absolutely, right? And the New York Times did prove that with their games and things like that. Now, if I go down to the next level here, what I would call the prosumer level or special interest, I'm a runner, I'm a boater, I'm an airplane guy, I love cooking. Can I do more there? Yes, you can. Can I be a membership? Can I offer events and webinars, et cetera? And then taking it to what I would call the B2B level, subscriptions a part of it from data, but there's also lead gen and events and white papers and things along those lines, that where you start to build that connection with the audience member and you start to monetize that audience asset a lot of different ways. And some of it might be subscription, might be membership, but general news, yeah, I would say there's probably a limit to the number of people who are going to pay for general news in today's world.
Yeah, I always wonder how well those surveys really capture where people are thinking when they hear news, they hear like they think newspaper, but like they're
Right.
not taking into account that they're like subscribed to a Patreon of like a history podcast they like or a running magazine or something like that. So maybe like the universe is much larger across a lot of different niches, but they're just thinking like general news or
Yeah,
something.
and that's the thing. Like, again, that's why I try not to paint media as this big brush, is because I can slice this 10 different ways. And then you have companies like Semaphore, right? Semaphore, who is essentially becoming the Davos of North America with their big event in DC every year. And their thesis was, when the Justin Smith started this, was there's 300 million, educated people that want general news, right? That different from what it is. But now they've really kind of niched down into becoming more an event community environment with news driving that type of thing. So is that the better model? Sure. I think there's some interesting things there. I think there's questions on the buyer seller at those events. What does that long-term event strategy look like for, like, an Atlantic or a Semaphore or a Time? I think there's some interesting conversations around that could be really valuable, where you're not just a pure B2B trade show or event type organizer. So I think there's a ways to there's still a lot of ways to make money in media. And I think people forget that. But at the end of the day, it's really good content. That's what you have to do. You have to build really good content for that to happen.
Yeah, I kind of unlocked that with my own newsletter recently, where I realized that there's something psychologically barring some people from signing up for a subscription, like something about the act of giving someone your credit card and giving them
Yeah.
permission to take from it every single month. So I started repackaging my case studies, which are pretty evergreen, and repackaging them as like ebooks and then selling those as one off. And I've seen like a lot of like actual sales from that because it's like there's something a lot less prohibitive about asking someone to make a one-time payment versus like ongoing subscriptions.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good model, right? Okay, I'm gonna get what's the exchange of value, right? Like, and I think, oh, this is something that, and I think we also sometimes forget that scarcity drives demand, and like the fact that you have created something that is perceived as scarce and valuable. Yeah, all right. I want this ebook. I want this thing. I'll pay that one time thing. Not saying your content isn't valuable, your day to day newsletter, but there's a lot of people writing about newsletters, so or about the media industry or things like that. Is that considered less scarce? And thus, this is, and so I'm willing to pay for this than that, right? There's a definitely some psychology around this, and there's obviously a lot of pricing. Been a lot of research around pricing, how to price using decor pricing. You know, you get $10, $50, and $1,000 because you're trying to get someone to the $50, but you get a few people at the $1,000, right? Which is crazy. But like, there's a lot of ways that people use psychology and pricing and the way they use this. But I think we also have to remember that like scarcity creates value. And if something perceives something as scarce, I think this is why niche media is having its moment now. Then they're willing to pay for it or willing to whip out their credit card in a way that they may not for the general news type environment.
So there's this talk now about. Just to kind of hammer home that point, so you're saying if you are a general news organization, if you can peel off if there's some niche within what you're doing, can you peel that off and sell that as a separate product or something like
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is exactly, or using the data to show you that, you know what, we'll pick on the New York Times here. Like, we're going to create, I mean, they kind of did it with The Athletic and they kind of did it with Wirecutter, right? Like, we're going to peel these niches off.
Recipes, yeah.
Yeah, recipes. Like, this is, again, we tend to overcomplicate this. And it's like, there's a reason why people are paying for Netflix and Hulu and Amazon is because it's really good content that they like and they're willing to stripe their credit card for this. So like, let's create verticals that are really good and see if we can monetize them off that.
Yeah, I kind of like my hot take on like the Washington Post and its struggles is like they should have launched a ton of like B2B verticals so that the main brand is still kind of like the B2C Washington Post brand, but it's funneling people into these like more expensive like niche like subscription products or
I,
something
I,
like
I couldn't
that.
agree more. I mean, I think, a good friend of mine, Sean Griffey, who lives in DC and, started Industry Dive and is on our board. He, said that basically publicly. He was like, look, you have Punchbowl, you have Axios, you have Semaphore, you've got all these sort of players in the DC market that are covering a pretty crazy environment right now in terms of like all the things that can happen in DC. But the New York Post isn't gone vertical, right? They could own that. They could really be that brand and own it and really kind of, you said, use general news and then create these vertical offshoots. I think it's an exact right strategy for them, given the where we are just as a sort of the larger ecosystem in DC around news and information.
So, I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about just briefly was like, obviously you're mainly kind of obviously a lot of stuff on the subscription side and stuff like that. But there's always been talk about first party data as it relates to advertising. I don't think you have like a specific ad tech product at Amita, but like, what are ways that like Amita plugs like the data that you're using plugs into ad tech that in a way that could help a publisher get better yield or whatever
Yeah.
the financial term is on their advertising
Yeah,
inventory.
no. So we do power the advertising. We don't have an ad network that you see in some other providers, primarily because our clients are selling very high CPMS and they have a sales team, and they don't necessarily need an ad network. They're a lot of cases sold out on inventory in many cases. But one, the first party data from an advertising perspective is obviously very powerful, right? If I'm any type of brand or advertiser and I'm trying to reach my audience, I want to know more about them. I want to know I'm in front of the right way. So one, we help on the sales side, the ad sales sides of our clients by providing them that data, right? I'm trying to reach, left-handed pilots in the Pacific Northwest. Great. We have those. Here they are. And when they come to the website, we are going to integrate with Google Ad Manager. We're going to integrate with Meta and other ad roll, other offsites to push both that first party data on site and target them with a pop up or an ad unit. Or we're going to push that first party data to third party offsite environments where you can then retarget those individuals leaving the site. Additionally, when I see them coming to the website, because of the email solution we have, I can send a full email offering as well. So I see Simon is browsing this content. I know that Boeing is trying to talk to you, so you're going to get a Boeing ad, and then you're also going to get an email from Boeing within the next 24 hours because of your browsing behavior and what you're showing from that. So there's multiple ways that we support and power that first party advertising component. And then again, from a media is not a monolith conversation. Some clients are very much just display ads, display ads, display ads. You're driving down the interstate and you're just running by an ad. Or we have other clients that are very much lead gen, and you're driving down the interstate, and I know it's Simon driving a red Volvo, and he's driving 85 miles an hour, and I want to target him specifically. So like, depending on the business model that our clients are doing, from lead gen all the way to display, from an ad component, we can support that based on their business rules and what they're trying to do from there.
So not to get too technical, but like, and not that even I have the expertise to get very technical on this, but like, when someone a user is or user visits a website, there's this like thing that's happening in milliseconds where the demand side platform, the supply side platform, they're
Yep.
talking to each other, and through something called a waterfall, and then it's like determining the value of that user to the advertiser, and supposedly finding the ad that's going to bid the
That
highest
right.
for that
Yeah.
person. So is that like in those milliseconds? Is it pulling data from Amida to like try to identify ways that this user is more valuable, so it gets a higher bidding? Like
Yeah.
what's
So
kind of
it's
happening there?
there's a good question. So where we really, if I were to split this screen in half here for those watching and for those listening, think about left to right on your radio. I'm cutting it in half here down the middle here. Sort of above the fold, what I have to say, that's very much the ad tech world, right? That's very much the programmatic world where you're coming to the website, you're an anonymous user, and that cookie's firing and it's doing a match with LiveRamp or the trade desk, and there's a bid because of your profile and because of everything else you've read across the web. I'm able to track that cookie, and because of who you are, you're going to get a Delta Airlines ad and I'm going to get a United ad, right? Because of just of our browsing behavior. Or it's baseball season. I've been browsing. I'm from Atlanta. I've been browsing to go back to Atlanta to see a Braves game. And so I'm going to get a Braves ad, even though I'm in Chicago, right? You're going to get a Nats ad. So that's very much the ad tech world. Omida really plays, I would say, kind of below the fold, if you think about it that way. Where we play really well is on that first party data. So we aren't an ad tech platform we are pushing our clients' data into Trade Desk or LiveRamp. Our clients can connect our data set to those systems and provide better, I would say, relevant data to those platforms. But by doing that, you are exposing that data to these systems, and it kind of, frankly, breaks down the value I believe that the publisher has on that first party data. Not saying that the ad tech world is not valuable. It is. But that is really happening in sort of that anonymous cookie stream. Where Omida plays is really once, obviously we have the anonymous first party cookie, but we're not providing that first party cookie unless our clients do so themselves to those ad tech platforms. From there, we really think we. Go ahead. Sorry.
So you're saying that you don't really provide much utility in the open programmatic, like you're better leverage when publishers are doing direct sales.
We're better leverage when we're doing direct sales, and when we are having really want to own that first party data set within the publishing world. From there, that's where we really are strong. That's not saying our clients don't take the data and push it to the open web. They can, and some do, but it's a business decision. We aren't doing that just by nature by signing up with Omida.
Yeah.
From there,
Okay.
that's a
So
business
you kind of
choice.
hit you kind of hinted that of where what's on the immediate product rollout of this chatbot.
Yeah.
So when you look ahead like 2 to 3 years from now, what are publishers are going to be doing that they're not doing now? Like especially if they have Omida integrated, what's the kind of the next level of how they're going to be getting insights or having smarter content recommendations? What do you hope
Yeah.
the future looks like 2 or 3 years from now?
Yeah. I think the future, one, I think one thing. One, I hope that the efficiency gains that we can get from some of this technology, and by sort of simplifying a publisher's life, that they can reinvest that into editorial and content. I think we are going to see at some point, as I talked about earlier, sort of this concept of scarcity creates demand. If the robots are creating all this content, I think we will see a pullback into that. This is human created content. This is content that was created by a human, that has this is validated. Not that we didn't use AI to maybe write a better headline or things along those lines. I'm okay with that, right? I think that's fair game to get that headline. To your point about someone's might churning from a newsletter, and the fourth story in your newsletter is what they're really interested in. Well, let's tell them about it, right? Let's not hide it. I think there's ways where we can embrace AI as editorial that isn't going to like hurt our editorial thinking, right? Our editorial mindset from here. Um, so one, I hope that what we're doing in the next 2 years is that we have made a investment back into the editorial product and the editorial content. That I think what's drove these media, particularly legacy media, but even I would say startup media is that component of it. From there, I hope we're spending a hell of a lot less time worrying about like where the data is in this platform or that platform or this. I think it causes immense friction for the subscriber and for the audience member when they aren't being treated as a reader of the brand or a fan of the brand. And then their interaction with that brand, whether it's through a podcast or through a newsletter or a magazine or a website, is so disconnected and doesn't feel like I have a connection to that. And I think you look at consumer brands, I don't mean consumer media, I mean consumer like CPG companies, an airline. I log into my Delta app, I go to my Delta website, I even log in the goddamn back of the back seat of the plane now, and I can log in with my Delta account and it knows who I am. And I feel that brand connection regardless of the platform I'm using them on from there. So I think those are like the three things. I think reinvestment in content, I think less friction for the audience so we can create better products, better connections to them. And then three, having that brand experience that it because of those two things, you're able to now communicate and connect to that fan who doesn't see yourself as a newsletter subscriber or website subscriber or magazine subscriber or an event attendee. They say I'm reading Simon, and he might be through a podcast, might be through a newsletter. Simon might do an event I might go to. Like that's the connection we need to build, and it needs to be a consistent. It needs to be a consistent user journey through that as well.
Okay, James, those are all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Sure. I'm online, obviously LinkedIn, James Capo. You can find me on there. I'm also on Twitter, same handle, James Capo. On there, I'm not as active as I used to be, but and if anyone would like to reach out to me, my email is jcapo@omeda.com, JCAPO, OMEDA.
Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate it.